It's nice to see some familiar faces with us from my old community where I was before, Beth Torah. And I'm very happy to have you with me. There's a problem, though. Right, rabbis go to a new synagogue so that we can reuse our old sermons. So you have to let me know when you guys are coming now. It's a joke you've heard before, not a sermon, but it's okay. So it's an old joke. Many of you probably have heard it before, even if you haven't heard me tell it, because it's not my joke. This is a joke written by Emo Phillips, if you know the comedian. I'm not going to do it in his voice, but we'll try to stick to the words as he told them. So he says, once I saw a guy on a bridge about to jump, and I said, don't do it. He said, nobody loves me. I said to him, God loves you. Do you believe in God? He said, yes. And I said, me too. Are you a Christian or are you Jewish? He said, I'm a Christian. I said, me too. Protestant or Catholic? And the man said that he's a Protestant. And I said, me too. What franchise? Baptist, he replied. He said, Baptist? Me too. I'm also a Baptist. And this went on and on and on. What kind of Baptist? Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? Northern Baptist. Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist, Northern Liberal Baptist. Northern Conservative Baptist. Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879, or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. And he said, Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. So I said, die, heretic, and I pushed him off. It's a tough break. But that's part of what I want to talk about for our Parsha today. It's not the idea of heresy. It's a topic for a different day. But related to heresy, or to the person that would push someone off a bridge for simple, slight change like that, is zealotry. Because for the zealot, something is all or nothing. There is no middle ground. You're with me or you're against me. You're a friend or you're a foe. And zealotry is something that I can only speak for myself, but it makes me uncomfortable. I think for many people, zealotry makes them uncomfortable. When we see it or we hear about it in the world today, and there are parts of the world where people do kill others because of their belief, because they disagree with their religious dogma or ideology, that happens today in 2022, and that makes us uncomfortable, or more than uncomfortable. But when we see it in our Torah, in our holy text, I think for some of us it makes us uncomfortable when we see zealotry. And that's the story that we have today of Pinchas. The Israelites are mingling with some others. They're mingling in ways that they're not supposed to. Moses is telling them, don't do it. God doesn't want you to do this. And one of the Israelites, Zimri, takes a woman to his tent to do what was not supposed to be done. And what does Pinchas do? He takes a spear and he takes their lives. He acts. He takes the law into his own hands. And the question then is this an act that should be praised or condemned? And the Torah seems to reward him for it. God bestows upon him a covenant of peace. He's honored for this act. And so for many of us, where zealotry makes us uncomfortable, seeing this in the Torah is a little bit uncomfortable. There are actually parts of the Torah that we're supposed to read in hushed tones because of our embarrassment over them. This isn't traditionally one of them, but if I were today thinking about which parts of the Torah would I want to read in a whispered tone, this might be one of them, for me at least. Now the truth is, it's not just me. The rabbis themselves are uncomfortable with Pinchas's act. And they're even more uncomfortable that the Torah doesn't seem to condemn it, that the Torah seems to praise and reward him for it. So the rabbis discuss all kinds of things related to this in the Gemara and the Talmud. One of the things they tell us is that it was a unique situation. Because of how massive it was that people were committing this sin, this act, and because even while Moses, the leader, and God were telling them not to, in the middle of that, he publicly defied Moses and God, that in that moment it was okay to act with zealousness. This act of zealotry was permitted. There are other rabbis who say it was okay because it was in the act, but had Zimri stopped before Pinchas went to do it, Pinchas would have been liable for murder if he had killed them. It was only in the moment when the action was being committed. Afterwards, he'd have to be punished through normal means, through a court, through trial, through judges and witnesses and testimony. There's another opinion in the Talmud which says that actually, if Zimri had seen Pinchas coming and had killed him, it would have been justified. It would have been self-defense because Pinchas was the pursuer. So the rabbis deal with this in all sorts of different ways because they're uncomfortable with it. But zealotry isn't something that happens in far-off parts of the world or way back when in our Torah. We see zealotry all the time in our world today. It's all over the place. Don't talk about it often, so you might not know this, but I'm from a little country called the United States of America. And the political debate there has gotten angry, mean, right? Those are simple words to describe it. But that's spreading. When I first came to Canada 5 years ago, I was amazed how polite political discourse seemed to be. But in just 5 years, I've seen a shift. I'm sure many of you over your lifetimes have seen that shift. As people dig into our side or their side. You're with us or you're against us. No room for compromise, no room for debate, no room for discussion, no room to admit that the other side has a kernel of truth or correctness or rightness on their side of the line. It's all on our side. Zealotry is growing. We see it in the world when there's cancel culture. When someone says something that, I'm not defending anyone's poor statements, but we're so sure that we're right and the other person's wrong that we're willing to take away people's careers, their livelihoods, ruin their family life, their home life. It's one thing for actions over a long period of a career. Sometimes it's one act. One word, one quick comment, unthoughtful. But zealotry doesn't have room for nuance. It's us or them. We see it on university campuses where there are speakers that promote all sorts of different values and ideas, some we agree with, some we disagree with, who are disinvited because of the views they hold. In the name of liberalism, free speech is becoming decimated. Free speech, which is a core liberal value. And I see it on the personal level. I know families where parents and children don't talk because of political differences, because of ideologies. I know friendships that have been ruined because of this. Because again, it's all or nothing. That's the world we live in. So the question then, how do we deal with this zealotry that we see in our parsha? When we see the damage that zealotry has in the world today. So one rabbi, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda of Berlin, or the Netziv as he's known, he was a 19th century Hasidic rabbi, and he tells us the novel interpretation that the Torah doesn't actually reward Pinchas with a covenant of peace. This isn't a reward, this isn't God condoning Pinchas's action. It's God helping him. Because what the Netziv tells us is when you act with zealotry, when you are so sure of your position that you can't see the person in front of you, you need help. You need that covenant of peace to fix you. It's a repair for his personality, for who he is. It's not a reward. It's to help him tone down his zeal. Another Rabbi, Menachem Mendel of Kotz, tells us that zealots can't be leaders. That up until this point, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, thought that Pinchas was going to be his successor. But that's why in our Parsha, it's passed on to Joshua. Because immediately after that act, Moses knows that Pinchas might want to do what's right. But when you're that sure of yourself, that you can't, again, see the people around you, you cannot lead a community. And that's why Joshua is appointed. Now, I don't want to say that zealotry is always bad. There are times when things really are good versus evil. There are times where things are right versus wrong. There are times where there are not good people on both sides. But we're so quick to be sure, to be 100% of one thing or the other. The most disgusting example that comes to mind in just the last couple of weeks was a Twitter conversation I saw. Some of you may have heard about it. It was written about in some of the Jewish press. There was a discussion about whether or not Anne Frank had white privilege. A child that was murdered by the Nazis for her religion. And it was debated whether or not she had white privilege. Was she better off or worse because she was white than people of other skin colors in her time? She died, murdered in the death camps. But for people that are so 100% sure that everybody who is white automatically benefits from that, they were sure she must have had white privilege. And on the opposite end, there are those who think that because there isn't slavery anymore, because there aren't residential schools, that there's no more racism in the world, that everybody is perfectly equal. On both sides, when you're 100% of one thing and you can't see the other, we're missing out on something in the middle. The Presbyterian Church just condemned Israel as an apartheid state in the United States. They voted, and they declared Israel an apartheid state. It's tough to imagine, because I don't know apartheid states where the minority people are protected by the rule of law, have elected positions, participate in parliament and government, have access to health care and everything else that's given to all Israeli citizens, no matter if they're Jewish or Arab. At the same time, there are those who think that it's not true that Palestinians suffer. Because that is true. There are Palestinian children, there are Palestinian women, there are Palestinian men who just simply want to live their lives in peace. But we see the situation too often as an either-or, or an all or nothing, and there's no room in the middle ground. So that's what I want us to think about this week. What does it mean to reserve our zealotry for the few times, if any, in our life, that it really deserves it? What would it be to walk around in the world and recognize that even if we're 99% sure we're right about our side, maybe there's something on the other side that we're missing? Maybe there's something we can learn, something we can talk about, or there's some place in the middle we can meet. There's a midrash on our parsha which says, woe for the kind of greatness that buries those who have it. Woe for the kind of greatness that doesn't bring good into the world. And far too often, that's what zealotry is. It's people with good intentions, but they don't bring good into the world. They bring evil. They bring division, they bring hatred, they bring conflict, and that's a problem. The final thought is, as we begin these 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, or as we're in the middle of them, remember this temple wasn't destroyed for a sin. The rabbis don't tell us that the temple was destroyed because the people weren't keeping Shabbat, or they weren't keeping kosher, or they weren't putting on their tefillin, or they weren't going to shul. The temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred. And that's what zealotry permits. When you're so sure you are right, it's easy to hate the person who's wrong. Shabbat shalom.